Thank you very much, Prasad. It's a big pleasure for me to participate here, and I'm really glad we kind of connected, and I have an opportunity to present here. So today I'm just going to talk about SOLIDWORKS API and the session called SOLIDWORKS API 101. And this is a session, very similar session I delivered on last two SOLIDWORKS experience or 3D experience worlds. And in particular, we're going to learn several aspects. So we're going to start by general overview of SOLIDWORKS API and what are different application types and categories are available for SOLIDWORKS API users. I'm also going to show you a few resources and some tools of how you can get started with SOLIDWORKS API. And also we're going to look at few different products in SOLIDWORKS portfolio, which actually also offer an API, which allows you to work with SOLIDWORKS files. So let me start by introducing myself. So my name is Artem Taturevich. I'm from Australia, and for the last several years, I have been running the company called Xerial. And my main expertise is the development of CAD and PDM software solution, and I have been doing that for the last 17 years. And based on that, I developed a product called CAD Plus Toolset, which is a SOLIDWORKS solution partner, which has quite a few of different tools. I've been developing a product called SOLIDWORKS, a CAD Plus Toolset, which is a solution partner to SOLIDWORKS, and it has a few tools. There are also some free tools inside that product, and some of those tools are actually going to use in my demonstration today. And also, I love to work with communities, so I've been presenting to a few SOLIDWORKS user group meetings, and I also have several resources available for all the users there, so they can utilize and can enjoy SOLIDWORKS APIs themselves. So in particular, I'm an author of codestack.net. So this is a website which has hundreds of SOLIDWORKS macros, which you can download for free, some tutorials for SOLIDWORKS API as well. So if you are more advanced developer, you might have heard of xcard.net, which is a framework to build your own add-ins and standalone applications for SOLIDWORKS, and much easier. And also an owner of SOLIDWORKS API LinkedIn group, where we're talking mainly about SOLIDWORKS API. So let me start by speaking about SOLIDWORKS API in general and what it is. So SOLIDWORKS API is effectively a tool which allows the software developers to interact with SOLIDWORKS. So SOLIDWORKS itself is a software. And this software is backed by thousands, millions, or even dozens of millions of lines of code. So whenever you are, and you communicate through that software, to the code via what is called the user interface. So whenever you click a button, for example, on your command manager, it sends a command to SOLIDWORKS code, and it's just doing something. So for example, when you want to create an extrude, it sends a command, then the code processes this command, and it sends response back. So for example, it's going to display the property manager page to collect some additional inputs to create your extrude. So just like that, API is very similar, but the only difference is instead of user interface, you operate with the code instructions. So you can run, for example, a macro, which sends some code instructions, and it's again going to SOLIDWORKS, calling SOLIDWORKS, and it's then going to the code and doing certain things. And in most cases, those two, like orange and blue arrows, they meet somewhere. So they actually end up calling the exact same code somewhere in source code of SOLIDWORKS. So that's why quite often, if let's say you have some bug in SOLIDWORKS, which you can reproduce from your user interface, most likely it will also be reproducible from your code, like a VBA macro as well. And quite often I can hear the term that SOLIDWORKS API is actually a VBA macro, which is not quite the case. So in fact, VBA macro is just one of the types of applications you can use to communicate with SOLIDWORKS via code instructions. And there are a few more. So there's also a standalone applications. So those one are executable, which are running externally to SOLIDWORKS, which are basically starting SOLIDWORKS instance or connecting to existing instance and calling some commands. There is also add-ins, and this is probably the most sophisticated tool. It's actually running within SOLIDWORKS application itself, and this integrated, and they provided the best look and feel for your application. So something which I probably my favorite types of applications. Then you also have a VSTA macros, And this is siblings to, let's say, VBA macros. The only difference is instead of Visual Basic as a language, they're using C# or VB.NET. And this is sort of an attempt by Microsoft, I would say, to kill VBA macros because those are quite an obsolete language. But in my opinion, this is a bad attempt. So the VSTA macros are not really reliable, something which I don't recommend using. And we're actually not going to talk about VSTA macros in today's demonstration. And finally, we have a script. So if you're using macros yourself, if you've been developing some APIs yourself, you might never heard of scripts to be a separate category, but I decided to put it as a separate category because there is a special room for that. And by scripts, I mean an instructions written in JavaScript or VB script. So for the last 17 years, I've been developing hundreds, thousands, probably several thousands of macros, hundreds of add-ins. And based on that, I categorized all of the different types of products produced with SOLIDWORKS API into the 5 main categories. So first one, I call it design automation. So this one probably was the most common category, and this is where you are trying to modify certain parameters in SOLIDWORKS model based on certain rules. So for example, change dimensions, change custom properties, maybe change states of the features. And I think the most famous tool in this category would be DriveWorks, where you can create your rules and just run the schedule of DriveWorks, and it's going to produce your models based on those rules. So another one, also very popular, is a batch processing. So basically, you have some repetitive tasks. You need to do certain small things, save file, rebuild file, or something like that. And you just want to do it for hundreds of files, or maybe all files in the folder, or maybe all the components in the assembly. And this one is going to be under the batch processing category. And I think one of the most used, maybe famous tool here, it's a SOLIDWORKS Task Scheduler, which allows you to run certain commands, simple commands in a batch mode for all the files in the folder. So another one, what I'm calling tailoring. And this is where you are reusing existing functionality and just making that a bit more fit to your specific purpose. So you don't really introduce something fundamentally new, just going to combine a few commands to just save you a few clicks. Maybe you're just going to customize your interface to fit your company guidelines or something like that. This is called tailoring. So another one is a bit more complicated category, and this is usually not done by macros, usually done by more sophisticated tools, but I would call it a system integration. This is effectively where you want to link multiple systems between each other, in particular SOLIDWORKS, to something like ERP or PDM. It's also all about file management, data extraction. So this all comes to that system integration, maybe data migration as well. So those 4 categories which I just listed, they're basically, it is also possible to automate that manually. So you don't necessarily need to write a software to do these things. So it's just going to be very inefficient, for example, to do batch processing manually, but you still can do it. So it's still something which you can do just with the standard SOLIDWORKS features. But there is one last category which I put here as a separate category, and I call it new functionality. And this is something, it's a fundamentally new thing, which is going to be introduced and added to SOLIDWORKS product with your API development. And this is something which you cannot really replicate using your standard tools. So for example, if you're talking about finite element analysis tools like SOLIDWORKS simulation, this is going to be something which you cannot really replicate manually. So they have this nice meshing algorithms. They have this displaying of the graphical areas in the graphics view of your forces, of your flows, and maybe some new format importing, exporting of different types of formats. And this is what I call the new functionality. And this is something which you can do with SOLIDWORKS API. A SOLIDWORKS API is actually provides you a bit more tools than what you can do in just typical SOLIDWORKS user interface. So now, how you get started. So there are many resources how you can get started. So unfortunately, SOLIDWORKS API does not have that massive number of resources like you have for SOLIDWORKS functionality, but there is still quite a few. And I think the first main entry point for you would be an API help documentation. And I'm going to demonstrate you in a second where you can access it. But this has pretty much everything about your SOLIDWORKS API development. So it has class diagrams and relations between classes. It has all the syntax for your methods, properties, classes, so you know how you can properly use those. It has tons of examples, and it is also available as a local file or online, and you can just even view previous versions of API help as well. So second one is some additional tools which you can install, which are called Software Development Kit or SDK to streamline your development. So SOLIDWORKS itself providing the software development kit for add-ins. You can install it, and then you can just install the template, so you can start creating your own add-ins based on the template. But there is no more than that, so just a template for the add-in. But there are also some third-party development framework and project templates which can streamline that development. And I'm going to show you one of those today, which is xcut.net. This is my development, free open source, available to everyone, which actually can make much easier for you to start developing your own add-ins. Pretty much have a wizard where you can select what you want, and it's going to create your template from that. So now, training courses. There are quite a few training courses, but not that many. So there is a SOLIDWORKS API Fundamentals course by SOLIDWORKS, and this one should be available with your local value-added reseller. So they usually deliver those training courses. So it's a good course to start. I would say in my experience, like when I just worked for one of the companies for the reseller, I actually delivered several of those courses myself. And also there are quite a few, not quite a few, there are several tutorials available on platforms, something like YouTube, and also something like Pluralsight, Linkly, and something like that. There are a few training courses for API, which you can search and take a look at. And finally, there are also quite a lot of resources available in forums and online resources. So codestack.net, which I mentioned before, has hundreds of macros for you to start. You can just copy the code and start coding, start using that macros. There are also official SOLIDWORKS forums, 3D Experience forums, where you have what SOLIDWORKS API question probably will be one of the most commonly asked questions over there from my experience. And you also have a few user forums, codforum.net, for example, codeoverflow.com, another one. And if you can also contact API support if you're on subscription, so you can ask them questions and they'll be able to help you. So now I'm just going to start demonstrating. So before I go that, any questions so far? Okay. All right, so now I'm just going to, so what I'm going to do in this next part of the session is I'm going to show you different types of macros, how to get started with macros, how to get started with different applications. And I will demonstrate you several examples, and I will explain why did I selected this particular type of application to implement that requirement. So why I selected macro, why I selected script, why I selected add-in or standalone application. So let me start by showing you first example. So here I have a part file, simple part file, and there are also several open windows here. So what I really want is I want to have some simple command in SOLIDWORKS to just close the other tabs except of active. So something like is available already in Chrome. So you can close other tabs in Chrome. So I just really want to have something similar in SOLIDWORKS. Just move it. Sorry? Okay. Okay. So for that, macro is a good example. So macro would be a good fit for that. And I already have that macro available at codestack.net. So here is a codestack.net, and you have, as I mentioned, you have hundreds of macro for yourself. You can just search through that library and select any macro you want. So if you're not a developer yourself, the best way is to not reinvent the wheel and just copy the macro from a website. So in here I have the macro, you can read how it's used. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy that code over here, come back to my SOLIDWORKS, and just create a new macro. For that, I can just use a macro toolbar, or I can go Tools, Macro, New, to start a new macro. So here I can just specify the name for that macro. Let's say close other docs. Click on save. And here, the thing called Microsoft Visual Basic Editor is appearing. So this one is an environment which is built into SolidWorks, which allows you to debug your macros and to run your macros and to write your macros. All right, so here we have, in this macro, we have some built-in code. I'm just going to delete it, and I'm just going to paste the code from my buffer. And now I can just run it. So basically what I do is I'm just going to click that green button over here to run it. So click on that. And now you can see that it's going to close all the files except effective. So actually I had 3 files open, now it's only 1. So this is just a nice little macro, which actually allowed me to do that pretty simple. And now let me talk a little bit about how you can execute the macros and what the particular macro is. So macro is using the Microsoft Visual Basic for Application Language, VBA. And this text here, the macro here is actually both executable and a source code. So when you write the code here, so it can like self-contained file. So there's a code here, and if you want to run it, you click on play, and it's going to run that macro. There is another way to run a macro. So you can also run a macro from tools, macro run, and you can just select the macro you want to run, or you can run it from here as well, from the toolbar button. But this is kind of defeats the purpose of the macros, in my opinion. The point is, if I would need to click several times to actually run my macro, so what is actually the saving? So here I just close 2 files with 1 click, but if I want to kind of go to the macro to run it, at least another 5 clicks, so I'm not saving anything. And SolidWorks is actually allowing a quite nice way to create a macro button. So what you can do, you can go to customize, and you can just go to commands, and you can then go to the macros here. And there is one button over here called new macro button. And if you drag that button over toolbar, you can drag it anywhere on your toolbar, it's actually going to pop up with a pop-up dialog, where you can just specify the path to the file. Is it just somewhere in the background? Just don't see it. It just locked somewhere. Sorry, it's just on my different screen, I think. Yeah. So just on my different screen. So that's going to bring you that dialog here, where you can just select your macro, select an icon, click OK, and this is the reusable button. So you can actually add this macro, add this button as many times as you want, and it's just going to create your macro buttons. So this is a good solution. There are a few drawbacks of that macro button. So firstly is you kind of need to have a very specific format for the icon for that macro button to host. And also, it's not very easy to restore those macro buttons. So some of users I know have like 20 macros, and they want to group them into the different toolbars, and they want to share them maybe with the colleagues, or they want to, let's say, after they switch the machines, they want to quickly bring them into that new environment. And it's not very easy to do with the macro buttons. Everything is stored in a registry, and it's quite hard to actually access it. So for that, I created a tool, which is a part of Cut Plus. It is a free tool, and that one is called Toolbar Plus. And what you can do with the Toolbar Plus is you can, there is a question, is it? Okay, no, okay, that's right. So, and you can create your own toolbar buttons, and you can host your macros on that toolbar. You can specify title, description, icon, very similar to what you can do with the macro button, but you can have a few additional parameters. You can pass arguments to your macros, but also you can actually run that macro automatically based on some event in SolidWorks. So so you can pass arguments, and you can specify the different triggers. So you can create a button for your macro, but you can also automatically run it on some events. Let's say whenever document is saved, whenever document is created, closed, etc., etc. So you don't need to be a SolidWorks API developer to actually use some existing macro and fit it to your specific purpose. You can also specify the scope. So whether this macro going to be run in part assemblies. And what is more important is that settings are saved in a single file, so you can easily back it up or maybe even share that file with your colleagues over the network. So I have already created the toolbar here. So I have two macros. So this one, which is closing as document, is already here, which is just demonstrated. But there is also another one called configurator. And let me show you how that works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, this model here has few driving dimensions. So this one is a length, and this one is a radius. So I'm just going to select those two dimensions. So I'm just going to select those two dimensions. So I think it's actually a pretty good thing to disable instance 3D. So I know it's actually have very bad influence on selecting dimensions when your instance 3D is on. So I'm just going to select those two dimensions, and I'm just going to run that configurator macro from my toolbar. So what I have now is I have a pop-up, and it's asking me to specify the name for my first dimension, D1, which is going to be length. Okay. And now it's going to ask me the name for my second dimension, which is going to be radius. And when I click OK, so at first glance, it looks like nothing has really happened. But if I look at my feature manager tree, there is a new feature over here. And most likely you haven't never seen that before. Maybe you've seen, but it's not something which you can add via standard commands in SolidWorks. And this feature is called macro feature. And it has a lot of different functionalities. You can do a lot of things with the macro feature. You can implement your own geometry. You can create dimensions for your own geometry. So if, let's say, you want to have some fancy fillet or something like that, you can implement it with the macro feature. And it's actually going to behave in the exact same way as any standard feature in SolidWorks. But you can have something more there. So you can just display custom UI. So if I click on edit feature in this user interface, I can see a pop-up message. And what I can do here, I can just change the dimensions to something like 5, click on apply. And what it's going to do is actually going to update my model based on those dimensions. So let me change it again to something a bit more distinct. So you see, that's now just applying this dimension to the model. So it actually makes it easier for you to reuse those parts if, for example, this is a library part. And what is important, this feature could be embedded completely into the model, and all the logic with the macro can be embedded into the model. And I could send you that model as it is, and you will be able to use it without installing any additional tools or macros. So let me just go back to my presentation here, just for one slide. So I just want to, so those two demonstrations which I just done were implemented using the SolidWorks VBA macro. And there are a few pros and cons for those types of applications, VBA macros. So the good about those macros, they're using what they call integrated development environment, which is already a part of SolidWorks. So that VBA editor is installed with SolidWorks. You do not need to install any additional tools or buy any additional licenses to create your macros. It's quite easy to execute and deploy the macros. So you simply send someone a file, they run it. So there is no need to engage with UAT. So because this macro does not require like admin privileges to be run, so it's actually very easy to use. So it's a bit easier to debug certain things in VBA macros. And also it supports an embedded macro feature. So that's the last example I showed to you. So you can embed your code inside the file, and this is the only possible with VBA macros. There are some limitations, and not all the APIs would be available to VBA macro, although I must say that pretty much everything would be available, just few things out of scope. There are slightly poorer performance comparing to add-ins. So if you need to do some really heavy operations, do some thousands of API calls, that would be not best choice for you. But I think one of the main problems for me with VBA macros, those are based on an obsolete language, which is Visual Basic, which is, I don't know, 30, 40 years old. It's very old, and it's really hard to maintain. So if your macro is actually growing and your functionality is growing, it's probably a very good it's a very good idea to switch away from macros, because it's become a nightmare maintaining that. But another good example, which I forgot to mention, is like I think like 80% or maybe 90% of all of the examples available online would be in VBA macro. So this one is a good option to start with probably because okay. Oh, just Deepak is saying that. Okay, no, it's good. Thank you. Just about muting. So most of the examples would be available in VBA macros. So why have I decided to implement those particular two examples as VBA rather than add-in or something like that? First, as a first example, when I closed the other documents, it's very simple. There are several lines of code, and there is nothing wrong with putting this as a macro, and it was already available on code stack, so I don't really need to reinvent the wheel, so I just grabbed it. And the second example with a VBA macro for a configurator for the module. This one is the only way I can embed the code because I want to reuse that part as a library element and I want to share it outside of my organization. So let me now continue and let me show you another example. So let me show you another example of configuration of design automation. So here I have some new development environment, and this one is called Microsoft Visual Studio, and this language is C#. So if you've been using macros, you see that it's slightly different to what I just showing to you in a macro, but although it's still there is some code. And this particular example I'm going to show you here is a standalone executable, which allows you to configure the furniture based on input parameters. So when we talked about VBA macros, and when you want to run the VBA macro, you actually just send that file, that SWP macro, and you can just run it. So it contains the code and it is an executable itself. So when we're talking about more sophisticated languages like C# in this case, or VB.NET, those have a separation between a source code and the binaries and the executables. So here's my source code, and I can use Microsoft Visual Studio to create and debug that code. But if I want to run it, the first thing I need to do, I need to compile that code into the executable. So I just do a rebuild. It's pretty fast for C#. And it's just going to compile me the executable in my case and all of the reference libraries which I will need to use to run this executable. So you can see it's all successful, and it's just showing that it has compiled to that location. So let me just open that location. So I'm just going to open that location over here and see what we have in our output. So we have several files. We even have some SOLIDWORKS file. We also have a model builder.exe, which is actually our entry point. So let me just double click on that. So it's actually going to start our application. And we also have some DLLs. So here we have some, just going to click generate. So I have some parameters, so height, width, depth of my furniture design. And when I click generate, what is happening, it's starting a new session of SOLIDWORKS. It's going to open my template model. It's going to apply those parameters. It's going to save it, and it's going to display a preview to me in that dialog. And the preview is going to be implemented using SOLIDWORKS eDrawings. So it will take a few seconds. It's actually going to like opening the files and applying this one. So here, I just want to quickly check what we have in here in this output. So we have an executable, as I mentioned. So this is an entry point of our application. Then we have some different DLLs, and those are interrupts for SOLIDWORKS. So when this is libraries which have some explanation, some description of what SOLIDWORKS API is, so you can use them in C#. And they also have some other libraries, in this case, Xcode libraries, which are used to streamline the actual development of SOLIDWORKS applications. So I'm just going to run through the code in a minute and just show you how it approximately looks when you're creating that applications. So here you can see now it's displaying me the preview. So it's showing me the preview, and this one is using eDrawings. So I can rotate this if I want to. And I can modify the dimensions over here if I want to regenerate. So let's say I'm just going to change it to 1000 and maybe 450 over here, and maybe just make it 3 drawings. So just do regenerate. It is going to repeat the same process again. So while just doing that, I can just quickly jump to my solution just to quickly review the source code. So you can see this is the structure of my source code, and there is some class. It's called class, which is actually, this is my main function here called regenerate. So what it does here, you see it's creating an instance of SOLIDWORKS application. it's then opening my template file, which is actually a part of my deployment. So this one is included into my software. So it's going to make a copy of that. Then it just applies the dimensions. So it's pretty much how all of the design automation software works. So they have certain dimension in your template file. They just grab the user parameter and then they apply this user parameter, rebuild the model, save the file, and just create the result for you. So then just close the application. So it's still building over here. And one of the benefits of standalone executable is actually also relatively simple to deploy. So what you do is you basically send all of those files to your clients. You maybe use zip it or something, and you send all of them. Important to include all of the references, otherwise it's not going to work. And then they can just double click on that executable to run that application. So fairly simple, does not require any admin privileges to run this executable. Although if you want to deploy it as like an installer, you might need some privileges. So you can see here, my preview has been updated. So now it's basically updated according to those changes. And I can save it if I want. And you can see, just want to quickly look at this interface. So you can create your own icons in this interface. You can create your logos, etc., etc., etc. And one of the reasons I decided to implement that as a standalone versus, let's say, VBA macro or add-in is when you develop this as a standalone application like that, you really, your executable becomes your entry point. So SolidWorks in this case become a secondary application. So your users, if they're not SolidWorks users, they might not know what macro is, how to open the model. Here, you can only show them what you want. You can specify all of your brandings, and you can put only the interface you're looking for to expose to those users. And they don't really care how that job will be done. So again, starting SolidWorks in the background, it's all what the software will do for you. So let me just quickly jump here. So just pros and cons of standalone application. So also just to recap, it's simple to execute and deploy. Just copy those outputs, you send it to your users. So it does not also require the admin privileges to run. So it hides that CAD behind. So your CAD system, SolidWorks in this case, become a secondary. So it's not an entry point. And there are a few cons. And again, the biggest one for me is much poorer performance. So if you need to do something like traversing entities, traversing faces in the model, and you need to do thousands of calls to API, it's going to be dozens, if not hundreds times slower than the same code in add-in. And it also has some limitations on the API scope. So not everything is possible with standalone that is possible with, let's say, add-ins. So now let me continue. Any questions? All right, we can probably just put it in the chat. So now I just want to come to a bit of a probably controversial type of application, something which you will not see as a separate, will not find as a separate category in SolidWorks API help, for example, and I call it scripts. So here I have a code, again, from a code stack, and I'm just going to copy that. This is a VB script. So this one is allowing you to export files in a batch mode. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy that code from here. And I will share, like at the end, there will be a slide where you can share all of those examples. You'll be able to download them yourself and play with those. So what I do is I'm just going to create the script. So if you remember, in my previous examples, for VBA macro, I have started the VBA editor from within SolidWorks. From my standalone application over here, I'm using the Microsoft Visual Studio as my editor for the code. And for scripts, you can just use text files. So what I do is I'm just going to create a text file over here, call it, batch export, for example. And I'm just going to give it a VBS extension, Visual Basic Script. So now I can just open that in any text editor. So I'm just going to use Notepad in my case, my favorite probably. And I'm just going to paste that code over here. So yeah, I apologize if it's not a very good quality of text and you probably cannot see it. I just want to quickly run through that script over here. So this script accepts arguments. So these scripts could be run from a Windows command line, and it accepts 4 arguments. The first one is a path to directory of your input files, which you want to process to batch and export. Second filter is a extension type of the files you want from this directory. So for example, SLDPRT, if you want to process all SOLIDWORKS part files. And then you have an output directory where you want to output your results. And the last one is an extension of your output. Step, IGES, Parasolid, etc., etc. So it's going to create or connect SOLIDWORKS sessions. It's going to write some logs. It's going to open each file from that folder which do match that filter. And it is going to export them into the nominated output folder. And it's just going to reuse the name of the input file. And the last line here is wapp.executapp. And even if you are not a developer, if you never seen SOLIDWORKS API or written a code, and let's say you're administrator and this is a part of your administration job, so you're running that script in your workflow, and let's say you notice that script, the user is complaining that script is closing SOLIDWORKS session, and they're asking you to fix it. And even if you, as I said, if you don't know what SOLIDWORKS API is, if you just look at the script, most likely you will get that this line is actually causing the SOLIDWORKS to close as wapp.executapp. So first thing you do, you probably just delete it, and you let me just delete it from here as well. So I'm just delete it and save it, and I'm just going to test whether it's actually fixing my problem. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to close that, and what I'm going to do is show you how you run it. So I can run it from a command line. So for that, I can just type cmd here to start the command line interface, and then I can just drag and drop my script here. And now I need to pass an argument to that script. So the first argument here would be an input folder. So for that, I'm just going to use, which one is that? So it will be models. So this one, so it's going to have some part files which I want to process. So for that, I can just drag and drop that one over here. Then the next parameter will be the extension for the files I want to process. So I want to process SOLIDWORKS part files. Now I need to specify the folder where I want to output that. So I'm just going to put it here, empty for now. So I'm just going to take it and drag and drop. Of course, I can just type if I want. And finally, I just want to specify the extension for my output, so step. And if I want to run the script, I need to use a cscript command. So cscript. And then I just run that and just let me run it. And you can see that now it's actually starting the process. So you see it outputting me some logs. So it's opening this panel file, exporting that panel file, then it's opening another file, then it's going to export it and just going to produce an output for me. So you see, like it says exporting, and I think it's done. So it's done. And if I look at my output, there are now 2-step files available in my output folder. So why did I use script in this particular case? Why didn't I use a macro or standalone application? And the reason is the scripts like that are usually run as a part of more complicated workflow, and that's usually a part of some server-based systems. And those systems are usually managed by IT administrators, IT people. And in my experience, at least, those IT guys are usually very, very assertive, and they're really looking after their environment. So they don't want to run something which they don't know what is inside. So if I would give them an executable, for example, a macro, they cannot see the source code, and it will be much harder to justify running that macro with them. So just an example, I'm showing to you where you just remove the line of code and it works. This is something which usually convinces them to add this script. Furthermore, the scripts are usually a part, we usually need to accept arguments, and VBA macros by default cannot accept arguments. So that's why the VB scripts, I think there is still a room for them in the SOLIDWORKS API world. And let me just quickly come here to just summarize it. So the pros, very easy to start with, just a simple text editor. There is no need to install any additional software. It's safe in plain text. It supports arguments. cons, really hard to debug. So if you want to debug some more complex script, it's going to be not an easy job. Again, performance similar to macros and similar to standalone applications. And again, similar to those applications, there is some limited API scope as well. So now let me show you some more interesting and more advanced tools. So first one is an add-in. So now we're going to talk a little bit about add-ins, and add-ins are probably my favorite types of applications. And I usually, whenever I do some custom development or my own products, I usually do this as add-ins, just unless there is some very specific need why I shouldn't. And the reason is add-ins provide you the best performance. They are running within the SOLIDWORKS process itself, and they provide you the best native look and feel for your applications. So let me just open one of the assemblies I have here. This should be shelf assembly, and this is one. Lit assembly has several components, and there are some custom properties. So there is a custom property called part number. I'm just going to use cut plus here to just show me the properties grid of all the properties available in this component. So I'm just going to go all references, and there is a so cut plus itself is an add-in to SOLIDWORKS developed using SOLIDWORKS API. And you see that there is only one custom property here called part number. There is a part numbers available. And if I take a look at my SQL database, I have a SQL database over here, and it has a part number and a description. And what I want to do is I want to create a tool which sits inside SOLIDWORKS, so my designers can easily pull that information from an SQL database and create a description custom property based on the part number. So I have done that already. So there is an SQL link command over here, also available in the menu, and called import properties. So when I click on that, the property manager page appears. And this property manager page is not a standard functionality within SOLIDWORKS, but it looks very similar to the standard functionality. So it's using similar control, similar style. So if I hover the mouse, it's showing me what it is. It's connection string. This is a table name that I'm going to get data from. This is my key. So my source part number custom property, I'm just going to extract in this column and return the description and apply it to the custom property. And it also has a very familiar control selection box. So it's actually asking me to select the components I want to process. So I'm just going to select a few components here, and I'm just going to click a green tick. And it's actually pretty fast. So it's actually took these components, connected to a SQL database, and bring those components back. So if I now go to cut plus again, and I go to properties grid, and again, I just select all of the references and all of the configurations. So you can see there is now a new description custom property, which is actually just immediately read from a SQL database. And the reason I decided to use it as a SOLIDWORKS add-in is because as a part of my organizations, well, it's fictional organization that my designers will need to use this command very often. They run it very often on their toolbar, and they want to have a best look and feel. So they want to use the property manager pages, for example. And that's why I decided to develop that as a SOLIDWORKS add-in. And the performance here would also be a critical point. So if your assembly had thousands of components, it will be much faster to go with SOLIDWORKS add-in versus the standalone application or VBA macro. So let me show you how that looks. Let me show you just last example of an add-in. So here, I just want to show you something, what I call a new functionality, which could be introduced with SOLIDWORKS API. So SOLIDWORKS files could be saved with just looking at the questions here. So just debug, thank you. Yeah, so debug just mentioned that Visual Studio, the one I'm using for add-ins and standalone applications, there is a community version of that Visual Studio, and it's free with some restrictions in terms of depending on the size of your organization and depending on the use case, you can use it for free, but it's pretty generous. So in most cases, you actually can use it for free, even for commercial purposes as well. Okay, so also another one, which language we can use to write the SOLIDWORKS API code. So it's basically any language which is COM compatible. So SOLIDWORKS API is exposed via COM, which is a technology of Windows to communicate between application, cross-process communication. And I would say that the most common would be VBA, Visual Basic for the macros. But if you want to write more complex, more reliable applications, I would recommend select one of three: C#, which I use, my favorite option, VB.NET, which is again a sibling of C# but has a very similar syntax to Visual Basic, and C++. So I would say those three would be your main choice. Okay, good. Okay, so no questions so far. So just last demonstration of an add-in is here. So SolidWorks allows you to save the file into the XAML format. So if I have this SolidWorks part file, if I click on Save As, and there is a Microsoft XAML format. So this is just an XML-like format by Microsoft, which you can encode your 3D information. But there is no option to import XAML format. So if I would want to open that, so there is no filter for XAML format over here. So there is no way. But the add-in is actually the best option, is to use an add-in to actually create your own importer. So here I'm just going to start new part file, and I already created that example. So here I have a XAML importer tool, again also available in a toolbar as well. And when I click on that, there is called overlay XAML. So it allows you to browse this XAML file like this one. So I'm going to browse it and click on open. And what happens? It's actually reading that information from that XAML file and bringing it into my model. But if you may notice, I call it overlay XAML. So I'm actually not importing, in this example, I'm not importing that as a geometry. So you can see there is nothing in your feature manager tree. There is no even like an STL-like feature here. But this actually pretty normal 3D graphic. So I can zoom it, I can rotate it, but I cannot select it. This is just the way I chose it to be. So it's actually rendered with a technology called OpenGL. And this is something which is utilized in the tools like SolidWorks Simulation to display their forces and streams, etc. And the good thing of that, it's actually not really affecting your performance much. So you can import really complex graphical objects, and it will not have much performance implications. Of course, depending on your requirements, you can bring it as a geometry as well with your SolidWorks API, so that's not a problem as well. So let me close SolidWorks and let me just quickly come back to my add-in here. Before that, probably let me just summarize the add-ins. So add-ins, it's my favorites type of application. So they have access to all the APIs available in SolidWorks. They have a maximized performance, and you can develop an application with a native look and feel. And if you're looking to bring your application to next level, you might want to look into the partnering with SolidWorks and registering that application at SolidWorks solution partner, or maybe even a gold partner eventually. And in my experience, I think all of the partner products actually add-ins. Few cons, and one of the biggest one for me is you require admin privileges to register your add-in. So it's hard to deploy because it needs to register a few COM objects and add some registry keys. And again, you need to have an admin privileges for that. It sometimes is not possible. And it might be a little bit more complicated to develop, although this is just arguable point. And another issue is the add-in is running inside SolidWorks application. So they're actually sharing the application domain. So if there is any issues, it can be they actually can crash SolidWorks. So if you have some error in your add-in, they may crash the whole SolidWorks session, and they potentially can conflict with other add-ins installed in this environment. So let me just quickly jump into the source code of the SQL importer add-in. So I built it using the xcode.net. So it's actually going to be much faster and much simpler. So if you build add-ins yourself with a standard SDK, you might notice it's actually much simpler here. And when you compile the add-in, so you also do it with a rebuild operation. So it's very similar to what we've done with our model configurator standalone application, the one which configured the furniture. But the difference is it's actually not producing executable. Instead, it's producing the DLLs. So if I navigate here, so we have an executable in our previous project, but in our edit, we don't have executables. It's all just DLLs. So that's why you need to register this DLL so that it's to be recognized by SOLIDWORKS edit. So now let's just very quickly show you how you can access API help. So you can access API help from online. So just here from SOLIDWORKS website. The good thing about online API help is always up to date, and it also have all the way to 2010, all the different versions. So if you develop a solution, a macro or an application, and you want your solution to target multiple versions, it's actually going to be a pretty good resource for you, because you can check if that particular API is available in SOLIDWORKS of previous versions. The SOLIDWORKS API is backwards compatible and forward compatible. That means that it's backwards and forwards compatible. It means that if you're using the libraries from, let's say, SOLIDWORKS 2024, as long as you do not use any APIs which new to that version, they will work with your previous versions as well of SOLIDWORKS. So just not use something which is fundamentally new. And the other way around. So if you develop something for SOLIDWORKS, let's say 2022, it should work with 2023 and 2024 without any changes, although sometimes there is some potential conflicts or regression could happen. So I'm not really using the web version of API help, mainly because I found it a bit clunky to navigate. So that's why I usually use a desktop version. And my recommendation to you is to create a link to your API help. So you can just start it from a file, because you're going to use it very often. And here you can just find all of the APIs available, all of the documentation, SOLIDWORKS and SOLIDWORKS products. So you can just navigate through that and see the description of each specific interface or method. So I'm just going to click on that. So let's say something like, annotation. So you can just click on that and just get an overview and plenty of examples, plenty of accessors. So it's actually pretty good tool for you to use. Also, you can start with codestack.net. So if you go to codestack.net and there is a SOLIDWORKS API getting started, you also have some introduction to SOLIDWORKS API. So also could be quite useful for you to look at that. Okay, so now let me go back to my. I just want to probably also show you a bit of a templates for add-in development. So if you want to create your own add-ins, you can use SOLIDWORKS SOLIDWORKS SDK, Software Development Kit. But I have also created a free templates based on xcode.net. So you can install them and you can just create a new project from your Microsoft Visual Studio. And here you have few templates available under the Xcode. And let's say if you want to create your own SOLIDWORKS add-in, you select it as a template, click on next, then you can specify the name of your add-in, click on next. You have few options. Framework, again, just use the default one if you're not sure what it is. And then you have a few more options here. So you can just hover mouse to explain what this option for. Let's say you can create your own custom property manager page, command manager, click on create. And it's going to create a scaffolding of your add-in for you. And one of the benefits of Xcode is you will not need to worry about installing any additional libraries, any references. You can just compile that and it will be added into your SOLIDWORKS, and you can just use that add-in and debug the code. So you can see here, just added a lot of comments as well. So it will be easier for you to get started. So there was a question. Okay, so the question, can we do the import-export add-in for different types of formats like OBJ? So this is a good question. So firstly, SOLIDWORKS API itself has, you can import and export all the files available in SOLIDWORKS, supported by SOLIDWORKS. So you can actually export to IGES, to STEP, import STEP and IGES. It's pretty much just one SOLIDWORKS API, load file or save as. But if you want something which is not supported by SOLIDWORKS, like OBJ in this case, you will need to implement all of the parsing and all of the heavy loading yourself. So answer is yes, it is possible, but it is not a simple job. So an example of that add-in XAML importer, which is shown to you, which again is going to be available for you to download and try to use. You will see that it's actually parsing that XML file and recognizing all of the geometries and recreating the geometry. So that wouldn't be a very simple task, although that's possible. All right? Okay, so let me just show you continue. So there is just few more things I want to show you. So this is just a comparison matrix of different types of applications and what they can do and what they cannot do, what their benefits and disadvantages. And also, I just want to quickly show is what is possible with SOLIDWORKS API. So what things you can do with SOLIDWORKS API. So you can do feature creations, so entities, drawing views, sketches, etc., etc. So you can do UI customization. So you create your own property manager pages, task panes, model view tabs, feature manager tree tabs, etc. You can also read document structure. So you can access document structure such as component tree, file external references, and all the features. So you can manage data, custom properties, attributes, or even store some custom information within the file using API. So you can just even store something like image or some big data structures inside your file. So you can also traverse topology of a file. So, all the faces and all of their parameters, all the edges and all their parameters. So if you want to create some tool based on the geometry, maybe meshing, you can do that as well. And also you can do your own bodies. You can create your own geometry and your own feature. So I mentioned before that you can, let's say, if you want to create some very fancy fillet, which is not available in SOLIDWORKS, and instead of creating that through multiple different features, you can create it as one feature with your own feature manager, property manager page, and with your own parameters and dimensions. So there are a few more applications in SOLIDWORKS palette, which allows you to work with SOLIDWORKS files. So SOLIDWORKS itself provides you the access to everything you can do with SOLIDWORKS files, pretty much everything you can do with as a user, but even more. But also there is another library. So there is thing called Document Manager. And this is one is really, really cool. And I'm just going to show you that in a moment. And also PDM Professional also can work with some SOLIDWORKS API. Although PDM Professional itself is based on Document Manager. So let me just quickly look at what the SOLIDWORKS Document Manager is. So SOLIDWORKS Document Manager is a library provided by SOLIDWORKS. So it's an external library. So it's not really SOLIDWORKS. And you can access SOLIDWORKS files to read and write the metadata directly. So you do not need to have SOLIDWORKS instance on your machine. You don't even need to have a license. So in order to use SOLIDWORKS Document Manager, you need to have a key. And the good news is that key is free if you have a SOLIDWORKS subscription. And the bad news, unfortunately, for someone who does not have subscription, you cannot even buy that. So the only way to access that key if you grab it from a subscription. So, and it's not backward compatible. So for every new major release of SOLIDWORKS, you have to request new key if you want to access new versions of the files. So its main use cases is read and write custom properties and read and write file structure to, for example, compose a bill of materials. And it's mainly used in the systems like PDM, some property management system, bill of material management, and custom viewers as well. So now let me show you a demo of that. So I'm just going to show you a macro, which is available in SOLIDWORKS in CodeStack. And this one is one of the most popular macro on the CodeStack. And it allows you to read and write custom properties information from SOLIDWORKS files directly from Excel. So let me show you how it works. So I have a files over here. So there are some models and there is some toolbox. So I have a few parts and assemblies. So I just want to sort that by type. And here is the files. And I want to extract custom properties from those files. And first thing I want to do is I want to bring the full file path of those files into the Excel. And here I just want to share a trick with you. So if you're using Windows 11, you will see a new command. If you have an advanced menu over here, like I did, you have a copy as path command. If you're on Windows 10, you need to hold the Shift button and click on right mouse button, and you will have a command called copy as path. So when you do that, you can just paste those file paths into something like an Excel. So just copied all the files and brought them to Excel. Now I want to extract a couple of properties from my models. So custom property called title and custom property called part number. So The macro I added to this Excel is a macro based on Document Manager, and it adds two functions into the Excel functions list. So one is called get as WPRP, and another one is called set as WPRP. So first one reads custom property, second one writes custom property. So let me just call it get as WPRP. So what I need to do is I need to specify the file path I want to read property from, and the name of the custom property I want to read the property from. So, and I click on green tick. So it gets me some data out quickly. So let me just go and modify that formula a bit, because I just want to drag and drop that formula across with the Excel magic. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it across everything over here. And basically, I will need to open each of those files and extract custom properties. And I just released it, and it just took probably less than a second to process those files. So believe it or not, but it's actually opened each of those files, and it read each of those custom properties, and it's rendered the custom properties over here. So in this case, it's, for example, was as an expression. So, and if I look at the macro itself, this one is like this one. This is a VBA macro based on Document Manager. And the thing is, you haven't seen popping up SOLIDWORKS session, you haven't seen like slow opening of the files. And the reason is it's actually do not use SOLIDWORKS to do that thing. So you can actually run that macro even if you do not have SOLIDWORKS installed on that machine. Okay. So now let me just go to the very last section, just a couple of more minutes. Just want to very quickly talk about SOLIDWORKS PDM Professional API. So SOLIDWORKS PDM Professional also allows an extension, and you cannot do this in SOLIDWORKS Standard on the Professional. So you can also do a standalone applications similar to SOLIDWORKS. There's an executable connects to your Vault, and you can just do some reading and writing of information. Something you can even take it further and create something like a web server, like a Web2 interface on SOLIDWORKS PDM. You can also have an add-ins similar to SOLIDWORKS. Those are integrated into the Vault. Those are the most sophisticated solutions. You can customize user interface. You can create your own commands. You can create your own toolbar buttons. You can also react on changes in the SOLIDWORKS PDM. So you can listen for the events. They're called hooks. So for example, whenever you check in, check out file, do some data card operation, you can run a code based on that. So you can also create a specific type of add-in called task add-in. And task add-ins, they could be launched as a task, and they could be scheduled, they could be integrated into the workflow, and they could be executed on a remote server. And also there's another type of add-in called serial number. So SOLIDWORKS has a few built-in schemes for serial numbers. And you can use that to, let's say, fill data card variables or to name files on creation from SOLIDWORKS. But if those default schemes are not enough, you can create your own logic. So for example, to source the serial number from ERP system. So this is probably the most common use case. Okay, so this one completes my presentation. So as I mentioned, you can download all of those resources, all of those add-ins for free from this URL and try it yourself. So please do not hesitate to contact me via email, LinkedIn, if you have any questions. I also post videos for some SOLIDWORKS API mainly on my YouTube channel. Thank you very much.